Okay. Um, Share screen. Just hang on here. Okay. So let me get to present. And there. All right. So this is a little presentation on the Baha'i faith. It's not a very large religion. It's a very new religion, a young one, only about 100 years old, or no, let me think here, 150 years old, 70 years old, 170, as we'll see. And worldwide, probably about 5 million people. So it's not a very large, um, yeah, uh, religion. Okay. Let me just move this up a little bit more. Okay. So the context here for the Baha'i faith is now we go to Iran. And again, this is in the modern period, as you can see here. We have already, what I mentioned when we did Islam, is we have dominant in Iran, the Twelver sect amongst the Shia. You remember the Shia are split into two main sects, what I call the Twelver sect and then the Seveners or the Ismailis. And it's the Twelver sect that is dominant in Iran even today, all right? And so going back into the early 1800s, we find a bit of a movement happening under the leadership of this fellow of the name here, Sheikh Ahmad al-Hassai. And the group became known as the Sheikhis, and he died, as you can see here, 1826. And this is a movement amongst the Shia who increasingly abandoned any kind of literal interpretations of Islam. Okay, that kind of developed more and more, and they favored more of symbolic interpretations in terms of how you would interpret aspects of Islamic law, Islamic practice. You know, instead of literally going on to the Hajj, you know, pilgrimage to Mecca, it is actually a journey in the heart. And this is something that's very typical of amongst the Sufis, the mystics of Islam. They tend to do that. And we'll find within the Baha'i faith, really hardly seems to be much difference at all between a lot of Sufi teachings and approach to things compared to the Baha'i. It's just over a couple of things that they really differ on, as we'll see. So this kind of symbolic interpretation became more and more prevalent here amongst the circle, number one. Number two, they also started to teach that they were expecting that the Imam Mahdi, that hidden Imam that had disappeared, you know, at the 12th Imam that disappeared that I mentioned when we talked about Islam, that hidden Imam that existed somehow in the spiritual plane because of his purity couldn't stand being here in this world of sin and darkness, has sort of withdrawn from this physical world, that he is about to return. He is about to manifest and appear. And so they started to preach this sort of expectation. He's about to show up. Let's start looking for him, okay? And again, a key thing here amongst the Shia, the beliefs about their imams, the spiritual leaders for the Shia Muslims, going right back to Muhammad, is that they are exceptional beings. They are very pure, sinless, holy, and they're just so filled with the very divine presence, the very essence, light of God. Okay, and so this is the expectation of this the hidden Imam, the Imam Mahdi, who's about to appear. And tied in with that were messianic beliefs that get incorporated here, and that their return of the Imam would indeed establish world peace, righteousness, purity on the planet. The destruction of all evil would take place. So there was this sort of, messianic expectation. Okay. So as I mentioned, they start looking for him, thinking that, he's about to appear. He's got to be here. He's coming. He's here somehow. So they started looking for the manifestation of this hidden Imam. And so they believed that they had found him in 1844 of this figure, this man named Sayyid Murtaza Ali Muhammad of Shiraz. Okay, nice long names. And there's a bit of a picture of him to the right here. And he claims that, no, I'm not the Imam Mahdi, the hidden Imam that's manifest. Instead, I am simply the gateway or the channel, helping to prepare the way for the one whom God shall manifest. Okay, whom God shall manifest. That's a favorite phrase that they use. And so he claimed that he was only preparing the way. Very similar to almost like John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus as the Messiah in Christianity. So increasingly, the group broke away from traditional Islam, again, with things taken as symbolically. For example, visions of heaven and hell, the resurrection, things are not meant to be taken literally. The resurrection referred to the coming of a new revelation. Heaven and hell aren't literal places you go to, but rather they represent states of consciousness that one moves on to after death, right? So they become increasingly mystical in their interpretations of Islam and religion. And so there's more and more tension between them and orthodoxy, traditional Islam. So that led then to their being persecuted. Okay, so persecution takes place. The Bab gets captured and is executed in front of a firing squad in the year 1850. All right, because they're trying to put an end to this heretical cult, so to speak. The followers of the Bab are become known as the Babis. Okay, and here, as I mentioned, they taught the New Age represent the resurrection meant the birthing of a whole new age in human history, where the promised one, sort of this messianic figure who was the hidden imam, would come and establish God's kingdom, and along with it bring a purity of religion and new revelation for our times. Okay, so there we go. Okay. Now, so the persecution begins here. Well, a couple of years after the execution of the Bab, there were some Babis that attempted an assassination of the Shah of Iran at the time. And that then resulted in further persecution, with many being killed, exiled, kicked out of the country or imprisoned. And one of these figures that was imprisoned was Mirza Hossein Ali, who became a successor to the Bab. And here there's a bit of a tension beginning right here, and it's going to develop further as to who is the successor to the Bab. Who did he appoint leadership to, after, who would follow in his footsteps after his death? There are those who held it would be this person. There are those who held he's going to become known as Baha'u'llah. Okay, Mirza Hossein Ali, he's going to become known as Baha'u'llah. And then there are others who held it was actually his stepbrother who became the leader. And there's going to be a bit of a tension between these two. So anyways, there is this persecution and the imprisonment of Mirza Hossein Ali, who claimed to be the successor to the Bab. Many believed he was. Okay, he's thrown into this dungeon known as the Black Pit in the summer of 1852. And it literally was a dungeon. There was no windows, very little food. You were literally in chains, in this dungeon. And he's in there for months until January. Okay, so during this time, and it's held that was around October, he has these visionary, revelatory experiences of some kind. He claims he was visited by this pure maiden, I don't know, maybe some angelic being, who knows, it's a bit ambiguous, but some kind of visitation of a being, and that it was communicated to him that indeed he is the one whom God would manifest. He is the one that everyone's waiting for. He is the one that would be launching a new age for humanity and be the bringer of a new revelation for our time. Okay. Now, that's where then he's going to receive or take on the title Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. And so anyways, this revelatory experience happens to him while he's in the dungeon. He keeps it to himself, though, okay, for some time. So he is released from prison in January. And however, apparently by an ambassador from Russia pleaded on his behalf for whatever reason, I don't know, but he managed to get released from prison instead of dying there in the dungeon. However, with his release, it was on the condition that he would be exiled. He would be not allowed to stay in Iran, but would have to leave, okay, so that he wouldn't create fuel for this new heretical movement of the Babis. All right, so he was forced to leave. So he then went to Iraq and Baghdad. On the next slide, you'll see where he all exiles. It's a bit of a map on the next slide. So he's had to leave to Baghdad. And while he was in Baghdad with a group of his followers, a lot of the Babis, there was a bit of tension between who is the real leader. And with dealing with that tension, he decided to withdraw into the mountains of Kurdistan, and there lived mostly as a hermit, but also hung out and had received visitations with the Sufis, the various Muslim mystics. Okay. And while he was in the mountains here at this time, he did quite a bit of writing. And then he returned a few years later to Baghdad at people requesting his return and requesting his leadership. So when he returns to Baghdad, it is there that he reveals this revelation that happened to him while he was in the dungeon, that he is the one whom God would manifest. He is the one that they're waiting for. He reveals this to a group of followers in Baghdad, the city of Baghdad, in the Garden of Rizwan, which is in the Euphrates River. Well, that's going to lead to further conflict, where there was a small group of Babis who did not follow him, but instead followed his stepbrother as the next leader, feeling that it was just too heretical, too contrary to more traditional Islam in various ways, and they broke apart here and always caused problems. And so the other group who followed his stepbrother, who followed Baha'u'llah's stepbrother, they pleaded and went to the government saying, listen, this is a heretical movement, they're dangerous, they may attempt to usurp the throne. It started causing problems. So then the Iraqis then decreed that Baha'u'llah had to be exiled and had to leave the country. And that is then where it's going to lead to his being moved from place to place, as you'll see in the next slide, where you can see here, he leaves Tehran in Iran, okay, in 1853. He goes through the mountains for a while, then he's in Baghdad, he's forced to leave there. He goes for a little while in Constantinople, today's Istanbul, and then had to leave that and go to Adrianople there, and then from there, little stops in Egypt, and eventually this whole region was under the rule of the Ottoman Turks at this time, okay, this whole area, and allowed him he was imprisoned in Acre, not Acre, Haifa, it's today Haifa, Israel, but it used to be called Acre. And that is then where he was in a bit of a prison, and then from there eventually went into house arrest, pretty nice house, and lived there the rest of his life until his death. Okay, so this is his whole journey here, and you can see there's a picture of Baha'u'llah. Okay, all right. So this is sort of the story, the backdrop of the founder of the Baha'i faith is Baha'u'llah, okay? And is based on his revelatory experience that he had in prison. Through all these exile and conflict and whatnot, he ends up in house arrest in Acre, which is today Haifa, Israel, where he then is there till the end of his life, okay? And so there you go for a bit of history, backdrop, and context. And just to complete the history part of it, his son was with him in this journey of exile throughout this time, was very devoted to his father, spent the time, in exile in prison with him. And after his father's death, he is the one that was appointed as the leader, the successor of this movement, the Baha'i faith. And he then spread it to the West, to Europe and North America in the years 1911 to 1913, where he sort of, there's a typo here, I just see. And he, how did that happen? Okay, so, no, I want to go back. How do I go back? Okay, good. Where he, okay, this is not going to work. Okay, I got to fix the typo later. Anyways, he, was on like a missionary journey, spreading the Baha'i faith, because his father made it very clear. I think do I have it here or on the next slide? Baha'u'llah had made it clear that the Baha'i faith was something that's meant to be offered to the whole of the world, that the whole of the world would be to recognize his leadership in bringing a new revelation for the world at this time. And so Baha'u'llah had written letters to Queen Elizabeth, the Tsar of Russia, Napoleon, US presidents, various leaders of the world at the time, inviting them to accept his guidance as the messenger for our time, bringing God's revelation to build a new world order of peace and unity. All right, I'll come back to that in a sec. So anyway, so this is why his son Abdul Baha, servant of the glory is what his name means, and you've got his dates there. He then went on this missionary journey to spread the faith. Well, then the next appointment of leadership the successor was to Abdul Baha's grandson. His name is Shoghi Effendi. And you can see here to the right, there's a picture of Abdul Baha, the older man below, and then his grandson Shoghi Effendi up above. And so he is honored as the guardian of the cause of God. And what he did is he translated a lot of the works of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah ended up writing around 100 volumes worth of material, a lot of material he had written. And so he then translated these works, organized the movement as an institution, and there were no successors appointed after him because he didn't have any children or sons. So the way it gets organized is that there are local assemblies. Every region, city will have sort of their local assembly gathering, okay, where somebody will be kind of responsible for leading it. Then there'll be somebody responsible for the National Assembly. So let's say, for example, here in Canada, the Assembly of Baha'is in Canada, somebody will be responsible for overseeing all of Canada. And then there are international assemblies with elected delegates representing the various countries that would come together here, where the center place of rule and organization and leadership, the supreme governing body, is in Haifa, Israel today. It's called the Universal House of Justice. So it's a bit of a hierarchy of leadership here. And it's just for organizational purposes and providing any kind of necessary leadership. It's, nothing overly bureaucratic in one sense compared to, say, like Catholicism. Okay. So what are the teachings here? Well, the message simply is this, is that we have entered into a new age and it's time for a new revelation. Okay. And this is the key thing where it breaks away from Islam. And if you remember, in Islam, a key thing is that Muhammad represents the ending of all prophecy. He is the last prophet, the final prophet. The revelation we have in the Quran is complete. It is perfect. It is an exact copy of the book in heaven, never to change. No need for any more prophets, any more revelations. It's a closed book. Okay, it's the end. It's sealed. It's finished. And here, the Baha'i faith maintains that no, that's not the case. There's always going to be a need for a new revelation. The world changes. Humanity evolves. Our sense of reality changes. We deal with different issues at different times. We're always progressing. And so as humans are progressing, likewise, the revelations need to progress, and they speak to any given time period in a way that's relevant and that's needed for that time period. And it's going to be an ongoing, progressive kind of nature. Okay, that's the key thing about the Baha'i. So that's, of course, why it's condemned as a heresy and is very much persecuted. Okay, especially in Iran, where the Baha'is make up the largest minority, and they're very much persecuted, outrageously so, in Iran. Okay, it's really tragic for the Baha'is there. They get imprisoned, all terrible, all kinds of things. Okay, and so where was I? So anyway, so this is the key thing, all right, is that it's a new revelation for the new age. So there are fundamentally three key concepts that the Baha'is emphasize and teach. And it's simply this: a unity of humanity, the unity of the world, and the unity of religion. So with unity of humanity, their key idea is that we need to recognize equality for all people and equal justice for all people. All forms of discrimination should end. So if it be against women in terms of gender issues, racial issues, okay, those need to be ended. And so that's a key thing, that in the eyes of God, we're all equal. Right? So no discrimination based on race or gender. That's really the key thing. And so in this regard, Baha'is encourage multiracial marriages, and that you marry someone of a different ethnicity in order to embody this principle of the unity of humanity. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, well, with unity of humanity, that's equality, justice for all, that there should be then a unified world government, and that there should be an end of any kind of conflict between nations. And that can only happen through a unified world order. But it's meant to be a type of theocracy. It's all under the will of God. It has religious directives in it. Okay, so all kinds of nationalism and potential national conflict is to end. There is to be a one world order that we need to work towards, and that we are to embrace the Baha'i calendar. becomes a big thing here, is because again, we've got, the Muslims have their lunar calendars, and so do the Jews, but there are differences between those two. We in the West have a solar-based calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which is sort of the Christian calendar. And other countries like over in India and China, their ancient traditions will have their own kind of calendar, so to speak. So here they advocate the Baha'i calendar, which is very simple of what I think it's 19 months of 19 days type of thing. So anyway, that's just a side point, but it's in there. So then the third key thing is a unity of religion. And by that, they hold that all religions actually come from God. They're all manifestations of God and from God, with various prophets having appeared in different times and different places to different people, that they all come from the one source, i.e. God. Okay? And so that there is fundamentally a unity of religion. However, and this is a key thing, you see, the unity of religion, but the key thing is the more recent revelations supersede and override past revelations, so that the most recent revelation is the valid one for our times that overrides and overrules the past revelations. So even though there's, quote, unity of religions, really everybody needs to become Baha'i. Okay, you can't get around that, all right? And so this is the revelation for our time that addresses our historical issues and needs that we're experiencing here and now, okay? And so it's the teachings of Baha'u'llah that constitutes this new revelation in his writings. They are, in a sense, the new holy book. The new scriptures are his writings. And he is the prophet for our times with this message of unity of humanity, world, and religion, okay? And it's held that there will be no new manifestation of God, no new prophet or revelation before the year 2866 CE. Okay, so it's good for pretty much 1,000 years. That's sort of the idea. Every 1,000 years, a new revelation will come. Is the idea here? Okay, so that's the basic teachings here. It's a very basic, simple religion in one sense. Okay. So in terms of faith and practice, it's simply you profess faith in Baha'u'llah, that indeed, he's the prophet for our times. You accept his teachings. There are no initiation rituals or fancy rituals of any kind, like a sacrament, the Eucharist in Christianity or anything like that. There's no priests. Okay. They ideally would like a house of Baha'i faith in all cities, but usually most people just meet community centers, people's homes here and there. There aren't that many buildings as such that are dedicated to Baha'i faith. The main one is, of course, in Haifa, Israel. I'll show you a picture down below. The scriptures are the writings of Baha'u'llah, as I said, 100 volumes. They're believed to be inspired, and they override, supersede all past revelations, and the most recent one is the Quran, and therefore the Quran is second in authority to the writings of Baha'u'llah, but his overrides it. Okay. You are to pray daily. You still have formal forms of prayer, but there's a bit more flexibility about that. You'll pray, again, they'll do 5 prayers every day at different times of the day, but different ones at different times. And you'll have your choice of 3 formal prayers to do, okay, at different times of the day, all right? But it adds up to doing 5 prayers. So it's kind of, an adaptation of the Muslim 5 times a day prayer, tweaked a bit. People will meet once a month, and again, their month is made up of 19 days, okay? And there's 19 months in a year. That's sort of the idea. And you'll get together once a month with other Baha'is for prayer, study, social gathering in some place. That's sort of what's expected. And then, again, an adaptation from Islam is to fast during what was the month of Ramadan. Here in this calendar, it always takes place in March. From March 2nd to the 20th, from sunrise to sunset, just like what we've seen in Islam. And then on the 21st, March 21st, you celebrate Nowruz, the New Year. And this is very much a Persian thing. All Persians celebrate the New Year on March 21st. No matter who you are, what religion, that's the Persian New Year. And so that's incorporated within the Baha'i faith. And that then is where you feast. It sort of replaces the festival in Islam of celebrating the ending of the fast of the month of Ramadan. You celebrate the New Year. The key holy days here are very basic, is to remember the Bab's birthday and death and revelation of identity, when he revealed his identity as being the gateway to the one who's to manifest. All right, so his birthday and then his execution, his date of death and his identity. Likewise with Baha'u'llah, his birthday, his death, and his revelation of identity, that he is the one whom God had manifest. Okay, so that's basically the faith and practice. And here is, you can see the picture of Haifa, Israel. In Haifa, Israel, where you have the center for the Baha'i faith, okay, where you have the Universal House of Justice. And this poses an issue, and this is one reason, even though it's really, I don't know, it's being manipulated. But the fact is that the Baha'is have freedom of religion and their rights are protected in Israel, whereas that wouldn't be the case in any other Muslim country. And so in Iran, they call the Baha'is Zionists, that they're traitors, that they're potential spies for Israel. And that's not the case at all. It's just that in Israel, the Israelis grant, it's a secular state that grants and is committed to freedom of religion, all right? And that your rights are protected by law, irrespective of what your faith is. You do not get that in the majority, I don't know, you can almost say all Muslim countries. Religious minorities are always persecuted, some more leniently, others very harshly, but it's not that safe for you, generally speaking. So here they fortunately are able to have their center here at Haifa, Israel, because this is too where they have the remains of Baha'u'llah there. It's sort of like a place of relic, that things like this are there. And so they're granted that in Israel, whereas they wouldn't have that anywhere else in that whole region where the movement began. So there you go. So here I just have a few little videos. I had a longer one regarding the situation around, but it's no longer available. It's been deleted, but it was a really good one and really showed that just the tragic persecution that takes place there of the Baha'is. And so anyways, here's a brief history of the Baha'i faith, 3 minutes each, very short, and then the persecution of Baha'is in Iran for about 7 minutes, just to give you a bit of an idea. And you also see a lot of footage of various things here as well, okay? So do watch those videos, and and that's pretty much all I have to say about the Baha'i faith. All right, all the best to you all. Bye.